Hello students, welcome to this class of MA Final paper 5th B, that is American Literature. I am Dr.S.S.Vaidwan, Department of English, and today we'll talk about a beautiful poem by Robert Frost, and the title of the poem is Mending Wall. As you all know, Robert Frost was one of the most reputed poet of the 20th century who achieved both enormous peculiarity and critical acclaim. This particular poem, The Mending Wall, is the opening poem of Frost's second collection of poetry, North of Boston, published in 1914. Mending Wall is, as I told you, one of the most anthologized and analyzed poems in modern literature, as quoted by Freeman Margaret H. Mending Wall, the poem, narrates a story from rural New England, the setting of almost all of the poems by Robert Frost. The narrator, the old farmer, contacts his neighbor, the young farmer, in the spring to rebuild the stone wall between the two farms, and it is here that the poem begins. So before we move on to the poem, let us talk about Robert Frost. Dear students, as I told you, Frost and his poems, they celebrate encounters with nature. On one level, Frost can be seen as simply continuing the love affair with the wilderness, so common in American mythology, and on the other level, the woodsman independent, defiant of urban artificiality. He criticizes this urban artificiality, and to an extent we can say that he seems to be a great admirer of the romantic poets, Keats and Wordsworth. They celebrated nature. Likewise, Robert Frost, he also celebrates nature, and nature is one of Frost's conceptions of himself. His poems, they convey a number of themes and even more attitudes. Frost portrays both the perils and joys of isolation in his poems. A considerable portion of Frost's poems are set either in winter or at night, or both. These are the times that tend to isolate people, to throw them on their own resources, to encourage reflection. Frost is also a daylight observer of ordinary people and their ways. He depicts the rural settings so minutely that we feel awestruck. Such a picturesque presentation of rural life. Frost and his world is one of neighbors, passing tramps, and even garrulous witches. His poems, they are all rooted in the countryside. His writing focuses on simple things and simple people, the rural people. He used language with the same economy and precision his characters display in their use of the scythe, the axe. And his presentation, his poem, is in a conversational style. So let us discuss the poem. The present poem, Mending Wall, presents a contradiction in life and humanity. The contradictions within each person, as man makes boundaries and he breaks boundaries. The poem also examines the role of boundaries in human society, as mending the wall serves both to separate and to join the two neighbors. And this is a great contradiction. The young farmer, who is not in favor of erecting boundaries or walls, while the old farmer, he says that good fences make good neighbors. The poem is written in blank verse and it is a dramatic lyric. The language of the poem is very simple conversational, and lucid. So let us read out the poem. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and make gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. So in these very opening lines of the poem, the poet, he says that the way of the two fields there is a wall raised by the old farmer who is representative of Frost. Frost himself represents the old farmer, that is the traditional way of thinking. But there is something that doesn't love the wall. While the young farmer, he is not in favor of erecting walls. While the old farmer is in favor of erecting the fence between their fields. The young farmer, who has a slight touch of mysticism, he feels that some supernatural power is at work which aims at removing all the barriers. He opines that there is some supernatural power at work that removes these barriers, these stones from the wall. Frost, due to which this ground gets covered up with snow, with the advent of warm rays of the sun, the snow melts and the boulders of the wall get disbalanced. This is the cause of the boulders not staying on the wall. The young man, he says that this tradition of the wall, this condition of the wall is certainly not the work of hunters. The hunters, they do not throw out the boulders from the wall. It is some supernatural, some natural way that these boulders get away from the wall. No doubt, they break the wall when they hunt to deprive the rabbits. The rural habit of hunting the rabbits of their hiding place out and expose them to the attack of the hungry dogs. But the young man says that he himself made repairs after the hunters had gone. It is really the work of some mysterious power. He says, he asserts that it is the work of some mysterious power, because every year when the season of spring comes, he does find them there. So Frost, in a way, we can say that he presents the philosophy of brotherhood and tolerance, and at a higher level talks about international tensions also, because he talks of boundaries, and boundaries, they always lead to dispute, as we can witness in the real world. The boundaries, the borders in between the countries, and they lead to national prejudice and also counter oppose the spirit of the revolt with traditionalism. So in a way, Frost, he has put forth the problem of boundaries and how boundaries can lead to disputes. So he is of the opinion that good fences make good neighbors. The poet in this poem presents two different views of the same question. That is, the repairing of the wall continues in spite of various arguments presented by the young farmer, and the modern, the new-fashioned young speaker, he asserts that the wall is not needed at all. All walls, all barriers, they should be abolished. The poem also reflects the theme of international relationship that the boundary should be eradicated. So Frost, he also opines that we should he thinks Frost, he thinks that he is not giving any offense to anybody and he will not harm his neighbor in any way if the wall is hurled down. There is definitely some power in nature that nourishes an enmity against the walls and pulls them down from time to time. It is possibly the work of fairies, but even the fairies will never do it. As I read from the poem, before I build a wall, I would ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I would rather, he said, it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. So he says that this is not the work of fairies. Even fairies will never do it. Such a superstitious argument should be presented by the old man and not by him. The young man is lost in such conflicting thoughts. He sees his old counterpart, the old farmer, is bringing stones, one in each hand, grasped firmly. The young man feels that the old farmer at this time looks like a wild barbarian of the Stone Age. So there is the difference of opinion between the old farmer and the new fashioned young farmer. The work of repairing the wall, it continues in spite of these various arguments presented by the young farmer. The new fashioned speaker of the poem, he talks about some supernatural power, hunters and elves. But the old man, he continues to fetch the boulders, fetch the stones and putting them, mending the wall. The old man, he is so curious to erect the wall that the old man, he only repeats his earlier comment that strong fences are must for generating and sustaining a real neighborly feelings. And that is why the poem ends with so beautiful lines. I would like to read. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. So this is how, on the surface, while we read the poem, it seems that Frost here is presenting the point of view of a young fellow very sympathetically and is saying that all the barriers of caste, creed, color, prejudices, predictions, borders, boundaries that separate man from man must be abolished. But when one reads the poem deeply, when we read in between lines, we find that it is the young fellow who is talking about the walls. The old man is only wanting to have fences, that is, temporary barriers. The young man exhibits many negative points in his character. It is he who initiates the process, mends the fences after the departure of hunters, and even when arguing against it, he continues with his job. He evinces no respect for the old man's point of view, and he pokes fun at the old man, the old farmer. If such a person is the neighbor, it is really necessary to have fences. The first mental barrier should be pulled down, then there should be another physical ones. So it is all the mental barriers that create this kind of a mismatch, and Frost, he rightly says, while he concludes the poem, that good fences make good neighbors. Dear students, I hope you have understood the poem, the meaning of the poem, and will continue with another poem by Robert Frost in the next video. Thank you very much.